me before I get into this. I love the Bible very much. Keep that in mind as we go through this. First thing I want to do, though, is review just a tad the law. You know what I love about this artwork on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is it shows God and man. And if you notice, you look at the artwork, you notice that God and man are like this. They're not like this. They're like this. Even their heads are parallel. I think that was very revelatory of Michael. But the law does this, doesn't it? It turns God into this big rejecter of man. And so we have to live in this rejection-based or this shame-based or this performance-based identity. Let's review just a little bit from last week. The law, it is the performance-driven life. Read into that what you would like. It's works-based self-esteem. I can only feel good about myself if I accomplish something that somebody else thinks is the right thing to accomplish. So if I have, I had a father that was really very non-existent. He was very distant. If I wanted to have anything to do with my father, I had to go out to the workshop where he was all the time and do something alongside him, and then maybe I might get noticed. And so my self-esteem was based on whether I got some attention from him. Now, it's better than a lot of the attention that I've heard some people get from their fathers. So in a way, I guess I might be a little lucky. Because some people's attention from their dads was very demeaning. So not only did it not fill in the blanks in our souls, it shredded our souls even more. And so the works that you have to accomplish to satisfy that image that towers over our lives is virtually impossible. And that was the problem with the law. Now, if you look at art through the centuries, and this isn't, we're talking about the Old Testament law and how bad it was then, but if you look at the artwork throughout the centuries, it goes from God and man. You've got Christ along the walls of the chapels, and you've got the apostles. And then with every century, with every new cathedral, Christ got further up and further up and further up until finally he's on the ceiling. And you have all of these people between Christ and those of us sitting in the pews. And that really is a great commentary, not a great commentary, but a truthful commentary on what has happened to the church over the centuries due to religion, which is based in the law. We realize that the Bible refers to the law as feeble and lacking in anything. Not just lacking everything, lacking in anything. It's a miserable concept. And we saw in Galatians that it was Jesus, his agenda, who was born under this same law we were, to break us out of the law. So why is it that we have come back to it? Why is it that within a short 15, 20 years of Christ's resurrection, humans started clamoring to get back into the law? It says in Galatians. To be known by God, and now we're still turning back to those weak and miserable principles to be enslaved all over again. And it's something that you have to actually intend to do. needed to be re-enslaved. Because our natural state is freedom. Our born-again state is freedom. So what is it about the law that is so magnetic that we find ourselves centuries later just as bad, if not in worse condition, than the original law and what Jesus had to say about it? Well, simple to understand, difficult to change. Our souls, who we were born on this planet to be, our soul, was born under law. It was born in bondage to the law of sin and death. So what does our soul know for the first 10 years, 20 years, some cases 30 years, 40 years, in some cases people who weren't born again until they were 50 or 60 or 70 years old? What have they been indoctrinated with? The law, performance. The soul is driven for performance. Little children who are desperate to get the approval of their parents. And either they eventually grow out of it and realize they're never going to get it, which locks them down in a tremendous amount of pain, anger, and dysfunction. Or they get it, and in some cases turn into these people who can do everything right, and they're very self-righteous. Well, I was always a good kid. That's just as much the law as the kid who could never measure up. It's still about measurements, right? Well, I wanted to look a little bit at Matthew 23. And the Lord brought me to this, and we're gonna be going through Matthew 23 throughout the next few weeks. But there are 3 chapters in the Bible that I have found to be remarkably profound. Probably the most impacting 3 chapters in the entire New Testament. Matthew 23, Matthew 24, and Matthew 25. In Matthew 23, Jesus he reveals the law and its effect on mankind, especially those who presume themselves to be leaders. It's the ultimate buyer beware passage, because he talks about the Pharisees, the woes. You've heard about the 7 woes of the Pharisees. Jesus says, "Woe to you, Pharisee," and da-da-da-da-da-da. "Woe to you, teachers of the law, because of da-da-da-da-da." And what's kind of scary is that I found tremendous parallels to how church leadership quite often is run today, and why the church is turning into a dying breed. And then Matthew 24 talks about, it's everything we need to know about the end of the age, the whole universe teaching that I do is really based in Matthew 24, and then Matthew 25, which is pretty much all we need to know about getting in on a freaking awesome eternity, okay? And that's the sheep and the goats, and we understand that there's identity issues in there. And these 3 chapters really span the scope of everything we need to know. From who we are not, who we are not to follow, who we are to follow, and what to watch for. But I'm going to work on Matthew 23 today, just a little bit, and conclude with some things that might be a little shaking to our underpinning. But I think I've made a clear case. So we start Matthew 23 with this. Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, to the crowds and the disciples, not the Pharisees or the teachers of the law, right? He's not talking to them, he's talking about them. All right? The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do. for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. The first thing he says, watch out. They presume to be your judge and jury. I've been kicked out of some churches because I would not submit to them being the judge and jury of my life. And other churches handed my hat quickly. It's kind of like jobs. I couldn't hold down a job until I hired myself. I couldn't stay in church until I started one. The second thing he says, they do not practice what they preach. They're hypocritical. In the Urban Dictionary, I loved this definition. A hypocrite is a person who engages in the same behaviors he condemns others for. Unfortunately, I know some leaders like that. But I want you to understand one very important thing. There are a lot of Christian leaders out there that are like this. And then there are a lot who aren't. This isn't their nature or their character. However, it doesn't take long if you dig into their church structure. They have a board that is. I get together with clergy every month. Now back to Lama, the Lakeland Area Ministerial Association, but I hang out with the clergy women on the first Tuesday of every month. And one of them, she's the senior pastor, the minister here at the Lutheran, Grace Lutheran. Another one just retired, but was the pastor at United Methodist Temple. One of them is the current primary practitioner of the Christian Science Church. Yeah, Baptists love me for that one. You hang out with a Christian Science. Jesus hung out with tax collectors. He hung out with drunkards and sinners, and they loved him. In other words, Jesus didn't have to be around people who believed exactly how he did. And they weren't uncomfortable with him being around. Kind of reminds me of Scott at the bar, you know. We refer to him as our bar chaplain. Many nights, he gets into great conversations about eternity, about Christ, about life. And they love him for it. Why? Because he doesn't presume to be any different, to be any better.